Okay, I can hear what you're saying, but let's put it as a practical scenario. Let's say John or Jane comes to you, just like you mentioned. This is a highly stressful situation. So my primary way that I've been taught by my environment is to hide. If this thing is bigger than me, to handle it. So I'll either stay at home. Okay, I have no option but stay at home, or, drink, or, find self-soothing because I have no way to really confront this thing. And you mentioned that you can either choose to have that method of dealing with it, or you can be proactive. Would you mind giving John or Jane some examples of how to be proactive, how I can deal with this into a practice, since that's not common?
Okay, so let's, for example, look at this feeling of anxiousness. Okay, the first thing, whenever an event occurs around us, the first thing that happens is a set of areas in our brain, collectively known as the emotional brain, look at that event and determine whether it's useful for us or not useful. So whether the event is friendly or unfriendly. In fact, it's just our brain's way of sort of preserving us as a species. In layman's terms, it's reward or threat.
Okay.
Now, I won't go into the science of how our emotional brain links to our prefrontal cortex, which then helps us determine our decision or our behavior.
Yes.
But what happens is that automatically and without awareness, this positive or negative emotion that we feel in our emotional brain automatically connects to our so-called thinking brain or the prefrontal cortex. And then this helps us determine whether we are going to make a decision that is either any sort of decision based on how we're feeling. So, for example, if you've been feeling anxious or uncertain, okay, maybe the response is to, go out and start panic buying of goods. Or when people feel stressed, they become aggressive. Okay, so this is the example that you used.
Yes.
Or when they feel anxious, they can become reactive. Or when people feel worried, they become problem-focused and sort of start feeding on their own anxiety and fears. Or they feel fearful and then they start sort of blaming the government or blaming the authorities.
Yeah, they didn't shut down these airplanes when they should have,
Exactly. So what we're saying here is that we need to start perhaps using some of these proactive strategies that I alluded to earlier in order to help us manage what automatically is how our brains are going to work. We feel anxious, we act this way. We feel stressed, we become aggressive. Yeah. So an example. So let's go into one of the thinking strategies, for example. Okay?
Yes. Okay.
All of this information that we're feeding off of comes from where? Our devices, mainly.
Yes.
Social media. So what would be an intelligent response? How about limit the amount of time you spend on your phone or your TV or into those feeds that are giving us sort of a lot of this information that's making us feel negative? So practically one of the things that I've done, albeit I did this earlier, was to cut off one of my social media feeds, Instagram, because I didn't want to have another source of people giving me information that would make me overly worried.
Yes.
So creating those kind of boundaries, for example. I talked a little bit about, we're talking about thinking strategies over here. Of course, as I mentioned, there's thinking, there's physical, there's environmental. But the thinking strategy, for example, is balancing the source of this information that we're getting. So yes, a lot of the information that we're getting is sort of negative. It is information that is making us fearful. But did you know that there are feeds, channels out there, for example, one called the Good News Network, that only provides information that is uplifting. They talk about uplifting stories to do with people who have recovered, uplifting stories to do with doctors who are battling this. So that sort of perspective taking, balancing, if you will, is a good way to, as I said, calm
yes,
the racing mind.